The pediatric ward at Fort Calder Base Hospital smelled of antiseptic and crayon wax, and on the fourth morning Kara still hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. She sat in the chair pulled close to her daughter's bed and watched the 4-line drip and tried not to count the seconds between Lily's breaths. The volunteer had come in just after 7, same as every morning. She signed the clipboard at the door, swapped her coat for the green vest with the white badge that said Fort Calder Volunteer, Mara V, and moved through the ward like a woman who had been moving through difficult rooms her entire life. Quiet. Level. No wasted steps. She brought a small bag with her, a board book, a packet of saltines, a bottle of orange juice. She set them on the tray table next to Lily's crayon box without making a production of it, pulled the chair to the far side of the bed, and said, "Good morning, Lily," like she was picking up a conversation they had started the day before. Which she was. Lily was 6 years old, and she had come into the ward 9 days ago with a respiratory infection that had turned into something more stubborn. Her father was deployed and had been for 11 months. The base hospital had become the whole world, and the world was this room, and in this room the most important person was a volunteer Kara had known for 4 days. Kara couldn't explain it except to say that Mara moved differently from the nurses and the attendings. Not faster. Not louder. She was quieter than almost anyone Kara had met, and she listened to Lily the way you listen when you know what it costs not to be heard. When Lily said she was afraid at night, Mara didn't say don't be afraid. She said, tell me what it looks like and we'll figure out what to do with it. When Lily said she missed her dad, Mara said, I know. And something in the way she said it made Kara believe she did. On the third morning, Lily had looked at Mara across the board book and said, you're a soldier lady. Not a question. A conclusion. Mara had tilted her head and asked, why do you say that? Because you walk like my dad walks, Lily said. And because your eyes look like you're always checking. Mara had considered this seriously, the way she considered everything Lily said. She said, your dad sounds like a smart man. Then she turned the page. Kara had smiled and said nothing. She thought Mara might be a veteran of some kind, she had that quality people carried when they'd learned stillness somewhere hard, but she didn't ask. It didn't seem like her business, and besides, what mattered was Lily. Dr. Hallett had spoken to Mara twice, both times in a register that was professionally neutral but carried an edge Kara had noticed. The first time he had said, the volunteer program is a tremendous resource, and the volunteer side of the room divider is over there. The second time he had said, we ask that guest volunteers remain in the non-clinical zone during assessments. Mara had nodded both times and moved where she was told, and when Hallett was gone she came back to the chair and picked up the board book from the place she had set it down. Kara had wanted to say something to Hallett, but she didn't. He was a competent physician, and Lily was his patient, and Kara was just the mother in the chair, running on no sleep and thin hope. It was the 6th morning when everything changed. Lily's fever had been stubborn all week, tracked and managed, but it had seemed to plateau at an uncomfortable level that wasn't quite alarming. At 4 in the morning it stopped plateauing. Kara woke from her chair sleep to the sound of Lily's breathing, a sound that was wrong in a way she recognized from the first night, a wet, labored quality that meant the fever had gone somewhere new. She pressed the call button. She stood up and took Lily's hand. The night duty nurse came first and looked at the monitors and went out again to page Hallett. Kara stood at the bed and watched the numbers and tried to remember how to breathe slowly. Lily's oxygen saturation was falling. Not fast, but steadily, in the direction that mattered. Mara arrived at 6:45 for her shift, signed the clipboard, and came through the door with her bag. She looked at the monitors before she looked at anything else. Kara saw it happen, the one quick scan, reading the numbers the way someone reads a map, and then Mara set the bag down on the chair without putting on her volunteer vest and came to the bed. She looked at Lily. She looked at the monitor. She put one hand very gently on Lily's sternum and held it there for 3 seconds. Hallett came in at 6:47. He looked at the readings, asked the night nurse 2 questions, moved to the supply tray. Mara was already there. She said, she needs needle decompression, right side, and she has secretions in the upper airway. I need a 14 gauge, a 30 cc syringe, a suction catheter, and barrier gloves. I also need you to call the ward commander. Hallett looked at her the way he had looked at her twice before, that professional neutrality with the edge under it. He said, "You're a volunteer." She said, "Yes. I also have 11 confirmed combat trauma saves and the Joint Special Operations surgical qualification. I will explain that later. Right now she has 5 minutes. I need the 14 gauge. Something in the way she said it moved through Hallett like a current, even if he didn't understand it yet. He stood for 2 seconds and then he stepped aside from the supply tray. Kara pressed herself against the far wall and held her own hand to keep from shaking. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that television makes emergency medicine dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no running. There was a woman at a child's bedside who moved with a precision that was almost slow to watch, because each movement was exactly the right one and none of them was wasted. Mara gloved. She spoke in 2-word increments to the night nurse standing beside her: position, angle, breathe, hold, and the night nurse followed without question, because that voice left no room for anything else. She worked by landmarks the way a person works by landmarks in the dark when there is no light and the landmarks are all they have and they know every one of them by heart. Lily's oxygen climbed back. It took 11 minutes from the moment Mara picked up the 14 gauge to the moment the monitor held steady at 94 and began to rise. Kara was crying and didn't know when she had started. The night nurse had paged the ward commander at some point during those 11 minutes. Major Ellison arrived in the doorway at 7:04, a compact man with a gray crew cut and the kind of face that had seen a considerable number of 7 in the morning situations. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Mara, who had stepped back from the bed and was removing her gloves. He looked at the volunteer badge on the chair where she had left it. He said, "What's your name?" "Mara Voss." He said, "Voss." And something in the way he said it, flat, careful, like a man rechecking a number, made Kara look at him. Ellison already had his tablet out. He was looking at something on the screen. His face did not change expression exactly, but it changed quality, a settling, the way a man's face settles when something he suspected is confirmed. He said, "Staff Sergeant Mara Voss. Joint Special Operations Surgical Qualification, Class of 2020. Youngest woman to complete the program. Firebase Aldrin Collapse, 2022, 11 confirmed combat trauma saves under direct fire, all 11 survived. Army Commendation Medal with Valor, citation sealed until this year." He looked up from the tablet. He looked at Mara. He said, "Call sign Renline." The room was very quiet. Mara had moved back to the chair beside Lily's bed. She was sitting down. She was holding Lily's hand in both of hers and watching the monitor the way she watched everything, with a steadiness that did not require anyone to notice it. She said, "Yes, sir." Ellison turned to Hallett. He didn't say anything. He just turned and looked at him, and Hallett looked at the floor. There were 3 men in the corridor outside Pediatric Recovery Ward B. Kara had noticed them over the past 2 days, big men in civilian clothes, the kind of big that meant something specific, waiting for a friend 2 rooms down who had come back from somewhere ahead of schedule. They had been quiet in the hallway, respectful, keeping their voices down the way people do when they understand a children's ward without being told. Ellison stepped to the doorway and said the call sign again, louder, Renline. One of the 3 men straightened first. Then the other 2. They didn't look at each other. They came to attention in the corridor outside the pediatric ward without a word, 3 large men in civilian clothes standing the way soldiers stand when they mean it, looking at the woman sitting beside the little girl's bed. Mara did not look at them. She was watching Lily's oxygen number climb. 96. 97. Lily opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling for a moment the way children look at ceilings when they are deciding where they are. Then she turned her head and found Mara. She said, "You're still here." Mara said, "I'm still here." Lily said, "You fixed it." Mara said, "Your body did most of the work. I just helped it find the right door." Lily considered this. Then she said, "I drew you something. It's on the tray." Kara had seen the drawing the afternoon before and thought it was sweet and not thought more about it. Now she looked at it. Lily had drawn a woman in a green vest with dark hair and level eyes. On the woman's chest, in yellow crayon, Lily had drawn a shape that was approximately a medal, a circle with lines coming off it like a sun. Kara looked at the drawing and then looked at Mara and then looked at the drawing again. Major Ellison was still in the doorway. He said, "Sergeant Voss. When you're ready, I'd like to file a proper commendation supplement for this morning. On behalf of this ward." Mara said, "That isn't necessary, sir." Ellison said, "That isn't a question." He looked once more at the drawing on the tray table. Then he looked at Hallett, who had not moved from the spot where he'd been standing since he stepped back from the supply tray, and he said, "Doctor, I'd like to speak with you after rounds." Hallett said, "Yes, sir." Ellison left. The three men in the corridor went back to their chairs, slowly, the way men move when they are thinking about something. One of them, the tallest, looked back through the door one more time before he sat. He met Kara's eyes for a moment and gave a single, deliberate nod. Kara nodded back. She didn't know what else to do. The ward settled into its ordinary morning sounds, the monitors, the soft footsteps, the occasional voice from the nursing station. Hallett left without speaking again. The night nurse stood for a moment at the foot of the bed and then reached up and straightened the monitor arm that didn't need straightening, and then she said, "You have good hands," to Mara, and walked out. Mara was quiet for a while. Lily had closed her eyes again, her breathing even, the numbers holding steady in the high 90s. Kara said, "Firebase Aldrin." That was the one on the news. The collapse. Mara said, "Yes." Kara said, 11 people. Mara said, 11. Kara looked at her daughter's face. Then she said, "She called you the soldier lady the second day. I thought it was just kids, you know. They notice things." Mara looked at Lily. She said, "Kids usually do." Kara said, "You knew, didn't you? When her oxygen started dropping last night. You were watching her breathe." Mara didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I watched everybody breathe in that place. It gets to be a habit." Kara sat back down in her chair. She was tired in a way that had stopped feeling like tiredness and started feeling like weather, something you were just inside. She looked at the drawing on the tray table. The yellow medal, the level eyes, the green vest. She thought about all the mornings. The board book. The orange juice. The way Mara had sat with Lily at 2 in the afternoon when visiting hours said she should have gone, just sat and listened, because Lily was afraid and her dad was far away and someone had to be there. She said, "The soldier lady." Mara smiled, just slightly, looking at Lily. It was a private kind of smile, the kind that doesn't need an audience. She said, "She's a good kid." Kara said, "She is." And then, because she didn't know how else to say what she meant and she was too tired and too grateful for the longer version, "Thank you." Mara said, "Thank you for letting me sit with her." Outside in the corridor the ward returned to itself. The monitors beeped their steady patience. Down the hall someone was laughing softly, and the sound of it moved through the pediatric ward like something ordinary and necessary, the kind of sound that means the worst of the night is over. On the tray table, the little girl's drawing held its yellow medal up to the morning light. It had been right all along.